Hello and welcome to the Atlas Agency, a channel all about Arkham Horror, the card game by Fantasy Flight Games. I'm your host Brandon, and this video is the first of a series of videos where I'll be exploring the contents of the newly released Path to Carcosa Deluxe expansion for Arkham. In today's video, I'll be sharing my first impressions of the new scenario and campaign content from this expansion box. I've had a chance to play the box's two new scenarios a handful of times each now, and so I'll be sharing my thoughts on the Carcosa experience so far. This is a spoiler-free look, and by that I mean I'll do my best to give you a sense of what I think about these scenarios without discussing any specific events or specific scenario cards. I will share some quick thoughts on a new encounter card keyword that's introduced here, but if you've read Fantasy Flight's own preview articles, then that shouldn't be anything new to you. I'll start by just kind of summarizing what's in this box as far as scenario content. The Path to Carcosa has two new scenarios. The first is titled Curtain Call, and the second is The Last King. These make up the first quarter of the full 8-scenario Path to Carcosa campaign, which is going to be filled out over the next 6 months by the cycle's 6 Mythos packs. That's just the standard structure for an Arkham campaign cycle. Nothing any different from Dunwich really there. The box also has 9 new encounter sets, which are going to be used in multiple scenarios over the course of the cycle to build each scenario's encounter deck. Most of these encounter sets are used in one of the 2 scenarios in this box, but there are a couple of new sets that aren't used that'll come up later on in the campaign. There's also a printed campaign guide, which covers just the scenarios that are in this box, and that's basically the scenario content that you're going to get here. In the last deluxe expansion box, the Dunwich Legacy, the campaign lets you play that box's 2 scenarios in either order. You could start with extracurricular activity, that scenario, and then move on to the House Always Wins, or you could swap the order and do the House Always Wins first. That's not the way that Path to Carcosa works. It has just a normal linear progression where you always start the campaign with Curtain Call and then move on to The Last King. It was kind of a neat thing for Dunwich to do that, but I certainly don't miss it here. I think having the fixed order serves this story better. I'll talk about each of these 2 scenarios individually a little bit later in this video, but I'll come right out here at the top and say that overall, I really enjoyed both scenarios. I think they do a great job of introducing this new cycle, both in terms of the tone of its story and the new mechanical themes that are present. Speaking of mechanical themes, if you followed the official Carcosa previews from Fantasy Flight, you probably know that there's a new encounter card keyword that's introduced in this box. When you draw an encounter card with the new hidden keyword, you add that card to your hand without showing it to any of the other players. While these cards are in your hand, they impose limits on how you play, such as restricting you from taking certain actions until you can get the card out of your hand. So a big part of these hidden cards is the fact that when you have one of them, the other players only know that you have one, but they don't know exactly which one of them you have, and you're not supposed to tell them, so they don't know exactly what new restrictions you're suddenly forced to play under. So that gives them a multiplayer emphasis, and one of my questions going into Carcosa was how well that hidden mechanic would work in solo play, especially since I play a lot of solo. It was kind of a concern for me. Having played with these hidden cards now, I'm of the opinion that these still do work fine in solo play. You lose that added dimension of the hidden information, but even with that element gone, the cards themselves still work well enough as regular treacheries. You can still have your plans for a round completely ruined by a hidden card that you draw, even if there's no one across the table trying to puzzle out what you have. The hidden cards themselves also don't have a huge presence in these scenarios. They're there, but I want to say that only one came up in the 2-player run that I did. I'll definitely be interested to see where the game takes hidden as the cycle progresses. I'm assuming we'll have some more influential hidden cards down the line, with the basic hidden cards from this deluxe box being used to add uncertainty and bump up the number of possible cards your teammate might be hiding from you. I think it's those later uses that are really going to decide how I feel about hidden in the end. Aside from the hidden keyword, another thing that the official previews for this expansion emphasized was a new campaign element that would be tracked over the course of the campaign, these tracks for doubt and conviction. These are present in the scenarios in this box, along with another cool overarching campaign thing that starts in Curtain Call, but as you would expect, it's just the foundations that you see here. It'll be a while before we see the payoff for these things, so they can't really be judged yet. Everything definitely seems promising though, and I'm really interested to see where it's going to go. As Dunwich unfolded, I was at times disappointed that the campaign elements weren't emphasized more, and it's probably still early to say here, but I sort of feel like this new campaign may be more in line with what I was hoping to see in that area. We've been promised that different Arkham campaigns would have somewhat different flavors and feels to them, and I feel like that definitely comes through in what's in this box. It really does feel different than Dunwich in a lot of ways. Things like the way the campaign uses chaos tokens. Dunwich took a somewhat consistent approach to how it made changes to your chaos bag, which, now that I think about it, was kind of thematically matched to the story that campaign was telling. Carcosa so far is handling its chaos tokens in a very different way. Another difference is just in the tone the campaign takes in its story text. I feel like the core set campaign and Dunwich are pretty close to each other in terms of the voice of their narration, but Carcosa, on the other hand, really seems to have its own unique voice. And I really feel like this box does a pretty great job with the story side of its content. I don't know if it's maybe just because I prepared myself a little better going into this cycle by doing the homework. That's something I really didn't do for Dunwich, but I definitely am enjoying the story elements of these scenarios. It's sort of subjective, but to me it feels like the quality there has gone up a tick from Dunwich and from the core set especially. The situations themselves in these scenarios are a lot of fun, and I especially like how Path sort of captures some of the themes from Chambers' original King in Yellow stories. It does that without retelling or reusing the actual stories or the plots. It does its own thing, but I think you can see the influence really clearly. If you have a chance to read The King in Yellow, which again is public domain and is free to read on the internet, I really think it's going to enhance your enjoyment of this cycle. You can check out my Carcosa cycle introduction video where I go into a little more detail on that topic. One thing I wanted to mention that kind of surprised me was the use of humor in these scenarios. As other people have pointed out, Arkham has always had kind of an element of humor to it, but it's often indirect. Sometimes it comes through when the themes behind the cards or abilities start to run into each other in funny, unintended ways. For example, there's a location in an earlier scenario where you can discard an ally for clues, which I've always interpreted thematically as you using your social connections to get information. Except the other day, when I used it, the ally I discarded was a dog. I also tend to laugh at a lot of player misfortunes and just the way the game dumps on you sometimes. To me, all of that's kind of funny. A lot of that's sort of indirect humor, but the Path to Carcosa to me seems to use humor a little bit more directly at times. Some of that's from the imagery, especially in the second scenario where I think there's a lot of humor just in the situation itself. A lot of it also comes through, though, in the tone that the narration takes towards the player, and that's something kind of new. As I said before, the core campaign in Dunwich kind of had the same narrative voice, and it was mostly neutral towards the player. In Carcosa, though, the game's narration actually sort of starts to poke fun at you as the player, and sort of seems antagonistic at times. It sort of feels like the game isn't on your side anymore. And because of how that's used, it can get pretty funny at times. There was one moment in particular, no spoilers, but I sort of wasn't sure if I should be doing a certain thing, and the game actually anticipated my confusion and was there waiting to make fun of me when I did the wrong thing. I thought that was pretty good. I suspect that this sort of thing will be part of the tone for the whole campaign, and it really does work, I think, to give Carcosa a unique voice. So let's drill down just briefly into the individual scenarios, starting with the first scenario, Curtain Call. I think this is a really solid scenario, and I think it does a great job of introducing the feel, the tone, and the new mechanics of the Carcosa campaign. It has some interesting strategic layers to it, and some interesting decisions you get to make, and these kind of reveal themselves to you as you become more familiar with the scenario. You start to discover new ways that you can handle certain parts of it. In the past, when I've wanted to test out a new deck list or investigator, I've tended to use the first scenario from the core set, The Gathering, as my testing ground. Even though it's not the most exciting scenario, I just find it to be the easiest option for that purpose. I'm usually wanting something that's really quick to set up, that isn't from the middle of a campaign, and where the mechanics aren't too outside the norm. They're sort of representative of normal Arkham gameplay. Up to now, The Gathering has just worked best for that, at least for me. But now I'm sort of thinking that Curtain Call might become my new go-to for that slot. It has a really quick setup, really not much more than The Gathering, and it's not too long to play either. It has a bit more depth to it, and also a nice mix of different types of challenge. The second scenario, The Last King, I like quite a bit as well. I think this is the game's second stab at portraying a more social style of investigation, the other one being The House Always Wins from the Dunwich Deluxe box. I thought House Always Wins did a pretty good job in that regard, but really I like the way that The Last King handles it even better, maybe even a lot better. It's got a little bit of a Midnight Masks vibe to it, and I love that style of scenario goal when it's executed well. On top of that, I really like the story and theme of this scenario. It's definitely one of the weirder situations to have appeared in the game so far, just as far as its imagery, and that sense of humor that I talked about before makes a pretty strong showing in this one as well. The whole scenario seems really well done, and while I haven't yet played it quite as many times as I've played Curtain Call, I think it's probably my favorite out of the two scenarios. So overall, as you can tell, I'm pretty satisfied with the scenario content in this box, and with the overall feeling of the new campaign. I'm definitely looking forward to watching Carcosa develop over the next 6 months. And that'll bring us to the end of this video. If you haven't already picked up Carcosa, I hope this has made you even more eager to do so. I'll be back in the near future to talk more about the Path to Carcosa Deluxe box. It's looking like I'll be hitting the Investigators next, probably with the new basic weakness cards lumped into that same video. In the meantime, I wish you the best of luck in your own investigations, and as always, thanks for watching. See you next time!